afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Budget and Finance Committee meeting for March 20th, 2017. Mr. Spindler and Mr. Herman, I'm going to have order in this room. If I hear your noises, you're going to be asked to leave. So I will have order throughout this meeting. All right, so members, we have today the FSR, of course. We have a number of closed session items. Item 9 seems to have brought some people out as well. I'm guessing that would have been a consent item, but we do have a couple cards on it. So why don't we go ahead and begin in order to get the departments who are standing in the standing room only area. Let's go ahead and take up the FSR first, item number 7. I can't.
Item number 7 is the City Administrative Officer report relative to the mid-year financial status report for fiscal year 2016-17.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, council members. Rich Llewellyn from the Chief Administrative Office with City Administrative Office, sorry, with the real expert to my left, Maria Gutierrez. And many of our staff members are here, so if there are detailed questions on specific departments, they'll be available to assist you with the departmental representatives. Thank you. And Maria will give you more details, but the mid-year FSR continues to highlight our challenges. Our expenditure balances have improved since the second FSR, but they still need adjustment. The revenue outlook has also improved somewhat, but revenues remain precarious. Finally, our reserve fund is just below 5%. We hope that will change with the judgment obligation bonds, but it is a tough budget. With this FSR, we are recommending various appropriations, and we appreciate the departments who have participated in a budget cutting exercise. We are proposing some cuts as well. And we believe that the reserve will be back up with the issuance of judgment obligation bonds, should your council continue with that. But that is an issue that requires continual following and continual watch. With that, I will turn it over to our expert, who has sort of guided you through many FSRs over the years and has been a tremendous teacher to me so far in this job.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Maria Gutierrez with the City Administrative Officer. So as Mr. Llewellyn mentioned, our year-end shortfall is now projected at $57.33 million. The recommendations in this report will reduce the year-end expenditure deficit to $27 million. And this is mainly due to the transfer of $24 million from the unappropriated balance, the 2016-17 budgetary shortfalls account. This $24 million was generated through the identification of approximately 5% in expense account reductions that are general fund funded across various city departments. There are also savings that were identified and within the departmental salary accounts as a result of the rescinding of the 1.5% health care subsidy. We identified approximately $9.9 million in trans savings. We also identified approximately $2 million from various unappropriated balance accounts, and those funds are now available to offset shortfalls. The mid-year FSR also identifies other actions that will further reduce the expenditure shortfall to $9.75 million. However, it's important to note that of these actions, $7.21 million relies upon internal measures to be taken by the police department. The major driver of our $57 million shortfall is largely the Human Resources Benefits Fund, with a reported shortfall of about $21 million. This is followed by the fire department with a shortfall of approximately $15 million, which is tied to the recent sworn labor agreements. The police department shortfall is now reported at $9.68 million, and the city attorney's shortfall is reported at $3.98 And this increase was due to the recent labor agreements with the city attorney, as well as increased litigation expense account shortfalls. Because of the magnitude of these shortfalls, we are recommending that departments mitigate their own shortfalls in the current year within their existing department resources. On the revenue side, at this time, we are 5.1 million below plan, which is an improvement from the 35.6 million reported in the second FSR. But despite these improvements, there's still downside risks, and these risks are across the property tax, the power revenue transfer, the utility users tax, departmental receipts, parking fine revenue, and franchise fee revenue. These downside risks eclipse positive trends in the transient occupancy tax and documentary transfer tax. TOT revenue from Airbnb is currently 10.7 million through January. Regardless, a revenue shortfall is still projected by year end. This amount of the revenue shortfall cannot be quantified at this time because we are awaiting business tax remittances. Due to the multiple downside risks to city revenues, we continue to recommend that any new policies under consideration that could further reduce current year general fund receipts should continue to be held in abeyance or disapproved. As highlighted, our reserve fund is below the 5% at this time. We anticipate that if approved, judgment obligation bond proceeds will restore the reserve fund above 5%. We continue to recommend that the city maintain the utmost restraint when considering further actions that use the reserve fund to offset current year deficits or fund program expansions or service restorations. In this FSR, we also revise our projected four-year budget outlook, particularly fiscal year 2017. Earlier this year, we cautioned that there were several expenditure items that were not included in the four-year outlook due to timing or pending resolution. The 2017-18 budget cap was previously identified at $84.6 million. We are now projecting an increase to $224 million. This increase comes after accounting for recent labor deals, the Independent Living Center settlement, assumed continuation of homelessness funding at current levels, and increasing liability claims. But we caution that this estimate excludes new or enhanced expanded services and known but unquantified risks to revenues, such as the power revenue transfer litigation. In addition to the Department of Water and Power litigation, there are other major issues of concern of risk that we cannot quantify at this time. One of these is federal funding. Any fiscal impacts to the city resulting from federal policy changes are currently unknown. Since the federal government is being funded through a continuing resolution which expires on April 28th, there is a possibility of cuts to domestic programs in the current fiscal year. For example, reductions may impact the city's anticipated grant funding for the 43rd Consolidated Plan Program year beginning April 1st. As a result, our FSR includes a recommendation to prioritize hiring. This is recommendation number 35. We are recommending that city departments be instructed to prioritize hiring for fully special funded positions, with the exception of vacant positions that are funded through the consolidated plan, which should remain unfilled until the consolidated plan awards have been announced by the federal government. This FSR also includes a recommendation that the council...
Can you hold on one second? Folks, we've got a lot of people in the room, and we're trying to focus on some things that are pretty monumentally important to the city. If I could just ask you to all do the courtesy of please checking your cell phones and making sure that they're not going off in the middle of the report, it would be very much appreciated. Thank you. Go right ahead.
So included in this FSR is a proposed transfer of a medium lift helicopter from the fire department to LAPD. This will cause a loss of about $4 million in general fund budgeted revenue and salvage receipts. As a result, in order to effectuate this transaction, it is recommended that the council approve an exemption to the 2016-17 interim budget policy to hold in abeyance or disapprove any new policies under consideration that could further reduce current year general fund receipts. It has been determined that the transfer of this helicopter is more cost-effective than the department having to purchase a new one at this time. So this would require an exemption of that policy, which was instituted to prevent a further reduction in general fund revenue. Another item of potential interest to this council is the identification of approximately $2.2 million in general fund shortfall with the Bureau of Sanitation, which is tied to the Clean Streets LA and the Operation Healthy Streets program. The Bureau has expanded these programs without an official authorization from the council or mayor. At this time, if the status quo continues, absent any supplemental appropriation from the reserve fund, this will result, as of April 1st, the department will have to cease operations on all 4 Clean Streets LA strike teams and reduce the Operation Healthy Street services by 60 days of comprehensive cleanings for both downtown Skid Row and Venice.
And just to clarify on that point, there is no recommendation before us to change the status quo to make such an appropriation. Is that right? That would require an action of this committee to approve an additional appropriation in order to prevent that eventuality from happening.
That is correct, sir.
Thank you. Go ahead.
There are other recommendations in this FSR. We're available to answer any additional questions that you may have that are of interest to you. We would like to introduce an amendment to this report, which is a minor technical adjustment to Attachment 5, which has been submitted to your committee clerk. And this basically just involves a payment from a different account that was previously reported in Attachment 5 regarding the Building and Safety Department. And
Very
it
good.
is on file.
Thank you. And that amendment should be before you, members. So before we get to general questions to the CAO, I'd like to go ahead and do our departmental roll call for members who have questions about departments and the recommendations relevant to them so that we can let everybody else get back to work. Mr. Blumenfield, any particular departments you'd like to call out?
EWDD, LAPD, Street Services, DOT, and Personnel.
DOT. Personnel, okay. Ms. Martinez?
I'd like to call DOT, LASA, and Sanitation. CAO's office is not going anywhere, right?
Right,
You're staying here.
right,
No, Councilmember.
right.
Thank goodness
Mr.
Maria
Englander?
is here to take care of you, sir.
Okay, I had police, fire, street services, those are already covered, right? And did somebody say sanitation as
I
well?
did.
Okay, great.
Are they here? I thought they
They
were.
are, yeah. Okay. All right, so the comprehensive list of departments is police, fire, street services, EWDD, DOT, personnel, LASA, and sanitation, right? Did I miss anybody? All right, if you are not from one of those departments and you would like to take your exit now, thank you very much for coming down. We appreciate it.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
When you're looking, that's why you have a lot of paper. You're like, you're just in the field now.
Okay, so, folks, we're having some departments leave, some others who are trying to find their way in to grab seats. So if we could just keep the noise down a little, we can continue with our questions. So, members, questions for the CAO to start off with. Ms. Martinez.
Really quickly, I know agreements with the fire chief officers and the management city attorneys are pending. Where are we on the negotiations? And do we expect that this would be done before the end of the fiscal year?
The city attorneys are on PAW committee this week, and the Fire Chief Association is going very well. We expect that soon as well.
So we expect to be done by the end of the fiscal year? Okay.
Yes, Councilmember.
That's all I have for the CAO's office.
Members, anything further? Mr. Blumenfield?
The FSR, one thing that was a little confusing to me, is more of a technical thing. It makes adjustments to rescinding the 1.5% employee health subsidy, and it also has an associated 1.5% salary increase. And so I'd think that those would be a wash, but they're not. It ends up being a budget hit of $4.5 million. And I wanted to understand, obviously, it's not an apples-to-apples comparison, but I just didn't understand why it wasn't an apples-to-apples comparison. I was hoping you could help shed light on that.
So the 1.5% employee health care contribution went hand in hand with the corresponding increase to departmental salary accounts, assuming 1.5% of their payroll, of the impacted employee payroll. For the most part, we swept the general fund dollars that were budgeted and associated to this provision. In some cases, such as the city attorney and there was another department, departments that were reporting shortfalls, the fire department, that were tied to the labor agreements, requested an exemption from this. If we had taken the money, it would exacerbate an already significant shortfall. So in those cases, we made an exception. There were special funds also budgeted, but we cannot transfer those special funds to the Human Resources Benefit Fund. So to the extent that we could, what we swept were the general fund dollars, with the exception of some departments who were already experiencing significant shortfalls due to the labor agreements.
So the salary increase was all general fund, but the employee health subsidy was potentially special fund? Is that why? And then that's why some of it could move?
The employee health care contribution was never made because it was never implemented. So had those contributions been made, those payments would have been going to the Human Resources Benefit Fund, and there would not be the shortfall that we have today. So what we have is, so that was going to be the offset. So the HRB must still make those payments. So what we have left are what was going to pay for the increases to salaries. So in the end, had it gone through, we would not have the HRB shortfall in that particular account.
Okay, get that. And another question about the Dwp Revenue Transfer. And this may have to be a closed session item at some point, but I see that there's now an additional case, a fourth case. And I guess the question is this a continued liability, or is there a way that we can close with our actions? I kind of thought we had closed the book on that liability, but it looks like there's still revenue transfer liability out there. Is that something that can be discussed in open session, or is that?
I would think that would be a question for our city attorney to address.
And I do want to state that the transfer as reflected in our FSR is what the board at DWP has approved. So all we could reflect as far as revenue coming into this fiscal year is what the board at the DWP approves, and it's based on a number of factors, including the actual sales of power from the prior fiscal years and their audited numbers as well. And as far as the fourth case is concerned, I think that is more of a closed session discussion at this point.
Yeah, I'm less worried about the number that we have now as opposed to the liability that I thought was off the table. So I guess I just put a pin in that one, something to be concerned about. I guess that's, I mean, and the other liability is just to put a pin in, I'm very worried about. I was just in D.C. last week, and some of the additional liabilities we're going to have from federal cuts, that are coming that we're trying to understand. But even the ACA cut, I imagine that's going to force more people and dependents to take advantage of our healthcare system because they're going to lose out on, or be perceived to lose out on that. So I don't know. There's a particular question in that, just a big worry that liability may even impact us in this fiscal year, and it's certainly going to impact us in next fiscal year. I'll leave it at that.
We share your concern, sir.
Thank you. Before we move on, just in order to give an opportunity for more people to sit down, if you're here for one of the closed session items, we're going to take the closed session in the other room. So if you want to just go ahead and get comfortable there, that will free up some seats, and we'll be with you as soon as we can get in there. Okay. Ms. Martinez, any further questions for the CAO?
Yeah, and I know I had called LASA as well, but I think the CAO's
We'll get to
office
that in a second.
Okay. Well, they can answer the question as well. It's for either department.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Stuart Jackson, Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority.
Go ahead.
My question was, given that both measures HHH and Measure M have both passed, do we anticipate that measures will pick up any of the costs towards addressing our homeless crisis?
Thank you for the question. The county has established a planning committee to look at the allocation of the Measure H revenue. The county is estimating $355 million a year for homeless services.
355?
Roughly around $355 million. The county has established a 50-member planning committee that will meet 4 times between now and the end of May to look at recommendations on how those funds can be allocated to address homelessness. And it'll be up to that committee to set priorities and set funding priorities.
But, Councilmember, I would add that our staff, the LASA staff, the mayor's budget staff are talking with the county about that exact question. Okay. The city has a regular base donation, sort of contribution to LASA that's had for many years, and last year it stepped it up dramatically, and much of that revenue was viewed as one time, where you were trying to prime the pump for revenue measures. So we are looking at that question. We believe the services should be continued, but it's possible some of them will be picked up by age.
Okay.
Mr. Englander?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's just for the CAO. So the recommendations, and I just wanted to go there since you opened it up with the judgment obligation bond, and actually looking at the numbers, and based on 5% of for our reserves of revenue in our financial policies, would actually put us at about 4.98% or so, not including the budget stabilization fund. If we included that, it would be a little over 6.6% or so. So with less than a $10 million problem to solve for the year end, I would think we could identify, to get us the 5%, the difference is about $1.1 million without a judgment obligation bond. So in looking at that, it'll probably be one of my recommendations at the end, but just putting that out there to work together to identify the $1.1 million necessary to bring us to the full 5% and eliminate that need for the job. But that's where I want to end up going for discussion. So I'm just putting that out there to you.
Thank you, Councilmember.
You're welcome.
Well, and you might add to that, even with the recommendations here, year-end shortfall would come to 2.24 million. So, I mean, that's almost within the, within the margin of error, almost. So we might, with a little bit more effort, we might be able to get there. That's something that we won't be necessarily considering as part of the FSR, but we will be considering it shortly in council. So it's certainly worth making an extra effort. Mr. Blumenfield, anything further for the CAO?
No, for the
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. That brings us to our departments. Why don't we start with Mr. Blumenfield? Did you have LAPD?
I do, so does...
Okay, let's go ahead and start with LAPD since I think everybody called that. You can go ahead and start us off, Mr. Blumenfield.
Okay, well, mine's sort of the general question. $5 million shortfall. It's less than 1/4% of the LAPD's budget. How do we close that budget? You know, what, I didn't see a plan so much in the document for closing it. So what's your idea? How do we do it? And is there a way to do it without impacting, hiring and career development and some of the things that we're all trying to continue?
Well, I think that the best way to answer that is to just answer you directly. When your question is there a way to impact that without impacting hiring, staff development, whether it's sworn or civilian? I don't believe so. I really don't. I think that when you look at the overall budget that we have, we currently have a $2.3 million deficit as it relates to the sworn salaries for the police department. When we adopted that budget, we adopted it at about a $5.5 million deficit. So we've already reduced that deficit within the sworn salaries account. By the way, we've been trying to manage limiting our promotions and limiting the pay grade advancements of our personnel. Essentially, we're floating vacancies throughout the department so that they're not vacant in any one position, for too much of a time in terms of a duration. But whenever we have someone acting in the capacity of an advanced pay grade position, we still owe them a certain amount of salary for that acting capacity. So we have that. The impact would be, for example, on our civilian side, for our personnel service, our PSRs, are the detention officers. We currently have a class of about 35 that we expect to hire in June. We have another class of 30 that we expect to hire for our police service representatives. All these positions, in turn, put sworn officers back into the field, in theory, to make sure that we're properly staffed out there. We've already started limiting our civilian overtime. We're slowing down in terms of our upgrades. We've taken an impact as it relates to the absorption of some of our funds. We had a $1.5 million coalition health subsidy. We had another 1.5 coalition MOU increase for uniform allowances. We had a $1.3 million revenue shortfall from the public safety fund, 1.8 million in reappropriations from the funds that were not spent from 2015 to 2016, and the $1.2 million transfer from the civilian salaries account, things that we've done so that we can try and shore up this account. Some of the unanticipated impacts that we've had in terms of our budget is quite frankly what I don't believe anybody anticipated is the election in November and the subsequent actions that have occurred as a result of those elections in terms of our deployment to make sure that we have and are guaranteeing the activities that by the Constitution in terms of free speech, free assembly, et cetera. And those are costing us over $2.1 million now. Come May Day or May 1st, there's another event that we anticipate there being over 200,000 people that are coming to express their beliefs and their right to speak. So we have those issues. We also have a $1.5 million that hasn't been transferred to us as a result of our deployment for the LA Rams. So that's a kind of a long answer to try and answer that. It's going to be tight for us to do any more changes or or reductions in terms of what we do for, that won't impact staffing.
Mr. Hunter? Good. Ms. Martinez?
I have no questions for this department.
Okay. There's a recommendation regarding transfer of the medium-lift helicopter from the fire department to the police department. Does the police department currently have any medium-lift helicopters in the fleet?
Can you hold on a second? I have my, our
Okay.
Commander Ed Prokoff, who oversees air operations for us, and he can go into greater detail in terms of what we have and what we need.
Great.
But specificity, we're recommending that we adopt that additional helicopter.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
I'm here as well as Captain Sean Parker, Commanding Officer of Air Sports Division. The department currently does not have a medium lift capability. We've worked in partnership with the fire department, excuse me, to greatly enhance our capability and our partnerships. Essentially, LA City Fire has trained 4 of our personnel, and in turn, obviously, we train them. It's an outstanding partnership. The added capability would be commensurate with the environment and our rapidly changing threat. The utility value alone far outweighs the monetary return or any salvaged funds that would be gained. This medium lift capability fills a critical void to provide more flexibility and capability of specialized assets, specifically traveling to and from any type of multi-pronged incident requiring tactical responses of personnel, robots, equipment, evacuations of citizens. Essentially, we have spent from port security grants about $225,000 in gear and equipment, training, night vision goggles, specifically for this aircraft. We've also spent about $107,000 from those port security grants to certify our personnel on this airframe. So again, this would align our commitment with the port that we've committed to provide radiological and nuclear detection over the port area. Specifically, a dual-engine aircraft obviously is better suited for that.
Yeah, essentially, and long story short, it provides us with a better counterterrorism support mechanism for our city.
Okay. Mr. Blumenfield, did you have a question on this? Oh, okay. So, presumably, I mean, this is a helicopter that has sort of lived its useful life for the fire department, but you'd be able to put it to use because the demands are different in police service than fire service of the helicopter.
Correct. And I believe that in terms of its air operations and total air hours,
Yeah.
mileage, for lack of a better phrase, I think this would be the helicopter that's the newest one that we would have, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. It's coming in, sir, with about 3,200 flight hours. LAFD has successfully flown this in support, obviously, of general services maintenance. About 222 hours the last 18 years. Police Department is projecting that we fly that airframe about 150 hours a year. So there still would be significant savings to the city for maintenance and so forth.
So I'm sorry, doing that math, what would you expect to be the life expectancy for police use of this helicopter?
Essentially, with proper maintenance, there would be no end state in this, sir.
North of 20 years.
It's a significant capability. Again, it would be our newest aircraft with regards to flight hours. We have some airframes upwards of 28, 30,000 hours on them that range back to 1986. And again, the values for city family, public safety for the for the city of Los Angeles is far outweighs any type of funding that would be gained from a salvage.
Yeah. Well, that's
Arguably.
kind of what we try to determine here. So, and that's kind of the reason for my question, because the police department has never had this capability, as far as I know, ever. So if we do this with a used fire department helicopter, what I'm concerned about is that a year from now or 2 years from now, I would not want the police department to come to the committee and say, you know, it's really worn out, we need a new $25 million medium-lift helicopter in order to maintain current services. So I'm hearing from you that that's not going to happen, right?
Correct.
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 Yes. Mr.
And would this be ever used for patrol?
Ideally, it's not suited as a support aircraft to logistically control officers on the ground. No, sir. It's designed specifically to fly over water, as it has two engines.
Right.
It's designed specifically to transport a lot of personnel and capability quickly to a rapidly unfolding event. Primarily, it would not be a patrol airship, but yes, it could in an emergency.
In an emergency, okay. So one offset, we've got, what's in the fleet now, 16?
17, sir.
17? So this would make it 18, but unique, and so would not replace any of the other existing 17,
So,
only in an emergency situation, which
Change the overall.
we're always in an emergency situation when we're flying over the city, but it would not replace any for patrol function.
no, sir, it would not impact that
For
at
air
all.
support.
And the city lost this capability, I think, in 2006 or 2007, where we were flying a medium-lift UH-1 that was given to us by the military, and we've tried several times, 3 or 4, to actually gain this capability for the city, but all of those opportunities essentially forced the city to increase its number of aircraft, and obviously that was financially restrictive.
And then one last question. What is the operational cost compared to the other 17?
I'll defer that to you, Sean. I think
About,
Operational maintenance?
about 820 hours, $820 per hour.
More than?
It's going to be, it's still the same. We still, GST still maintains the aircraft with trained mechanics, the same wrenches.
Okay, so operation and maintenance is the
It's-
same as the other 17, is what you're suggesting?
No, it's not.
No, no.
Same as what it is now.
It's different. For the 412, it's more. We will fly it less hours per year than the fire department flew it. So we're looking about at $820 an hour for the 412, give or take.
Again, I think what's important is the city has been supporting this airframe. General Services Division is best suited to support it, and they've been allowing the fire department to fly it extensively, 222 hours average. And again, we are projecting to fly it about 75 hours less, which again would be that savings of what the city was essentially expending to keep that airframe in the air the last 18 years.
Point of clarification,
Yeah.
Tyler Munhall, CAO. The department will retire one aircraft, one training aircraft, so the fleet size will still be 17 airships.
So much of the need for this is because of Homeland Security involving the port, as I thought I heard you say, the radiological and the other port-specific Homeland Security needs. Is that right?
That's correct, sir. One significant aspect and capability is that we would be able to fulfill our obligation and putting a detector that we have, chemical, radiological, biological, nuclear detection device on the aircraft and flying around the port and obviously clearing vehicles prior to them
Right.
or vessels entering the port.
Because you can use this to get to them at sea before they...
Correct.
get
So
with-
presently, our pilots are guided by a philosophy which allows them to fly only glide distance from shore, so not very far out for safety reasons, and this will allow us to reach out.
Okay, so that makes sense. Given that, has the CAO considered whether it would be appropriate or feasible to use any port funds to make this acquisition, whether to have it be technically owned by Port Police or LAPD, in either case, to have port funds pay for the salvage value of this to the general fund so that we can preserve that, so that we don't get hit with that $4 million loss, but still gain the tactical objectives that the police department has. So,
It's worth looking at, and we'll have to get back to you on it if
Okay.
we don't have it.
okay. I guess that's it.
I have a quick
Anything
question
else?
regarding
Yeah, Ms. Martinez.
your question, Mr. Chair. But who has the expertise? Would it be LAPD who would fly the aircraft? So it would be LAPD who flies the aircraft. but you're
Yes,
asking
ma'am.
for them to look into whether Port Police can house it and maintain it?
No, just whether they can pay for it.
Oh,
Whether the port
okay.
can use port funds to pay for it, so that we don't get hit for $4 million in the general.
But it's still, I mean, the expertise and the pilots would be LAPD officers.
That's correct.
Correct.
It'll be our
Just
airship.
want to make sure, because I didn't think it was their area
Yeah,
of
no.
expertise.
No, if it's for port benefit, it seems to me that it's
I get it.
worth considering whether the port should pay for it with port funds. And then, I guess, lastly, I know that the PD has done a terrific job of co-training with the fire department in hostage situations and SWAT kind of situations, and the fire department now is equipped for those situations and so on. Is this not, this is going to be a simplistic question, I know, but is this not the sort of thing that you could do jointly with the fire department so that when they, whatever medium lift aircraft they have in their fleet could still be utilized by the police department on an as-needed basis?
So, twofold, sir. I think one of the, obviously, challenges of the city fire is obviously they don't fly into hot zones, so to speak, where there's active engagement of exchange of gunfire and so forth. And secondly, any critical incident which would involve a rapid transportation of public safety personnel, city fire is going to have their hands full, just as much as our partners at the Sheriff's Department, who is currently supplementing city fire with a medium lift capability when we need it. Significant regional situation that's going to require multiple deployment of tactical resources at once. It's not fair, nor is it feasible for us to rely on city fire, who's going to have their hands full, as well as sheriffs transporting their own deputies.
Okay.
Additionally,
Yep.
and adding on to my clarification from before, fire is giving up a medium lift, and their fleet is going to go down to 4 medium lifts. They're at 5, or they were at 5. Now they're going to go to 4 for the next several years, so they won't have one of the medium lifts that they have used to support PD up to this point.
Okay, but they're still at maximum capacity with their staffing with those 4, right?
Yes,
Okay.
and they do have, their fleet size is changing because they're getting a training helicopter in frequency.
There you go. Okay, yeah, Mr. Blumenfield.
Just add, so you said we're losing 1 in the fleet, and so the maintenance hours of that goes away. How does that compare? And the maintenance for this is like 100 and something thousand a year. What's the delta in terms of the maintenance costs that we're going to have?
In comparison to the airships, we plan to salvage or replace with the medium lift.
Well, no, I'm saying we were at 17 aircraft. We're going to lose 1, or we're going to gain 1. It's $820 an hour for the one flying it, 160 hours.
It's roughly about a $400 an hour difference. The aircraft that we would salvage would be one of our Jet Rangers, which averages roughly $211 an hour.
But the hours are the hours going to shrink overall that are being used?
The hours will shrink for the use of the medium lift. We will use that less than
Then you use the other one, but the other 17 airships.
the other 16 will stay consistent. They will be our patrol operations and our training. Those hours will not change.
So the total number of hours for maintenance is going to change, or is going to stay the same?
Will decrease. Essentially, what will occur, sir, is there's 23 airframes between city fire and city police, and that number remains the same. What essentially changes is the assignment of 1 medium lift to police and taking 1 medium lift from fire, and we then will give up 1 single-engine Jet Ranger salvage that LA City Fire will then be able to bring on board, which they have. So essentially, if you look at it using 2 city departments, the numbers will stay the same, the assignments will be different, but overall, the projected cost for this will be less because the LAPD is projecting to fly about 75 hours less a year than LA City Fire averaged over 18 years. If that makes sense.
Yeah, although LAPD is still going to have to fly the same number of hours total. Forgetting the medium lift, that's like a different beast altogether, right? You're not going to lower the number of hours.
No, sir.
That you need.
Those
No.
will remain constant.
So the hours are constant, and we're just adding on the medium lift.
Well, we're adding it on to us, but that we're flying it less than the fire department would be flying.
But your budget basically for maintenance is going to have to go up by a certain amount, like by about 100,000 or something.
I think that's more appropriate for general services, but I think
Not necessarily a bad thing, I'm just trying to understand it. I mean,
I believe it would, but I think the challenging part is we have had a Bell Jet Ranger, which is a single-engine aircraft that's been offline because of significant age, tenure, and it's been offline since last March, so it hasn't flown at all. I mean, so trying to quantify those savings on that type of aircraft is extremely difficult.
For this year, there's no impact. The GSD is going to be able to handle this. They are submitting a 2017-18 budget request, which will be reviewed as part of the regular budget process. And so I don't know yet what that is going to include.
All right. Anything else for PD? Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's go ahead and call up fire next.
Well,
Okay, fire department next, please.
I think they're outside.
June's trying to get through. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Who called fire other than me?
I did, but you go ahead. You can go ahead and start. I'm still looking.
Okay, I just wanted to ask you briefly about the status of the AVL investment, what's been done to date on that, and where is the department in sort of completing the benefits that we've been trying to derive from that.
Good morning, or good afternoon. This project has been, frankly, lengthier than we had anticipated. I think that the original estimate by the department was that it would be completed in 2015. We're now in 2017. Primary reason is that it ended up to be much more complex than I think that the original project team had anticipated. Certainly with the addition of Maggie Goodrich as the public safety CIO, as well as the participation of Gartner as our project manager, there was the realization that there were certain steps that needed to be completed, certain hardware and software that also needed to be purchased for it to be fully implemented. So all of the steps have been completed with the exception of being able to integrate AVL into the CAD, and arguably that really is the most important step because the intention of AVL is to allow for the dispatch system to be able to provide a recommendation of the closest location of the resource, and without the integration of AVL to CAD, we won't be able to do that. So what is necessary is approximately $600,000 for us to be able to acquire the hardware, software, as well as the professional services to be able to complete that step.
Okay. And without taking that step, much of the value that's already been invested in these upgrades to date is not being realized.
And that's absolutely correct. I think that initially there was a lot of emphasis with regard to the mapping capability that obviously exists within the dispatch center. What that shows, though, is merely the location of where the resources are assigned at any given time, but the benefit that we derive from being able to know that information isn't going to be realized until we take the final step to be able to integrate AVL into the CAD.
Okay. Well, members, if there's nothing else for the fire department, I'd like to propose that by the year-end FSR, that the fire department report back with a proposal to complete the final phase of linking the AVL with the CAD so that we can hopefully fund that in this year's budget.
Okay, perfect, thanks.
Yeah, Mr. Englander.
Hello.
Hi.
Just quickly on the For our hiring plan, for our fire hiring plan. I think we were authorized, the department, for this fiscal year, about 230, I think, after attrition. Well, assuming attrition, a 20% attrition, so about 230 net recruits, is that correct?
Correct.
And so I just want to make sure we're on track and find out exactly where we're at. The number of graduates, we're about 136. I'm sorry, page 44. Just want to make sure we're hitting our targets. And I don't know if we're still operational on the other drill tower down in Pedro. So if you could just give us an update on where we're at with hiring.
We're on target, and actually for the next class, we're projecting to have 65 in the class, and I think 3 to 4 of those recruits are females. So we're, sorry?
I think there was only 2.
Oh, those were the graduates. She's talking about next classes.
Yeah, I saw the next class. I thought it was only 2 as well.
Okay, well, that certainly was our hope, and I think, maybe a couple of the females may have declined, but we were hoping that at least 2 of them would be alternates, so there still may be a possibility. But we certainly are on target relative to our hiring plan, and Fire Station, Drill Tower 40, actually is going to continue to be in operation until the current class graduates, and that will be in September, and then beginning in September, Drill Tower 40 will be closed down. We will be only operating with Drill Tower 81.
Okay. And then lastly, I didn't see in here, but OVB has been asking for, unless I missed it, has been asking for an office.
Yes.
And where are we at with that?
We did obtain an estimate from the Bureau of Engineering of the cost of replacing the 2 modular buildings that currently are in OVB. One of them, unfortunately, has been condemned because of excessive mold. So therefore, we only have one that we have staffing for, and engineering does recommend that that be replaced as well because both buildings were acquired at the same time. The cost estimate to replace both is $1.1 million. It was suggested that we request that as part of the CIEP for next fiscal year. We have had preliminary conversations with the CAO about their support for funding of that next fiscal year. I'm not sure whether or not they're going to continue to support that because my understanding is that there seems to be an emphasis on other infrastructure needs for both the police department and the fire department. That was an issue that the fire chief had requested as part of our mayor's budget hearing, and I'm not sure where that's going to land relative to next year's budget.
Okay. It's not before us right now, so
It's not what?
it's not before us right now.
Oh,
It's not, but
but he wants it to be.
But I want it to be.
I can sense it.
well, and I can't help but notice that there's a certain common demographic element among the 4 members of the Budget and Finance Committee who are sitting here today that would make that issue of significant concern, I think, to all of us. So,
Absolutely, yeah.
thank you.
And we are happy to bring it before the Budget and Finance Committee during the budget hearing if it is not in the mayor's blue book.
All right.
Unless we can get it done sooner.
That would even be better.
Anything else for fire members?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that brings up Mr. Blumenfield. You had street services?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go ahead and go to street services next.
So just, it's kind of a minor question, but there's a transfer of $1.575 million from pavement preservation account to contractual services, including $1.1 million for road infrastructure survey services. And I didn't really understand what that was about and wanted to just ask you to take a minute to shed some light. What are those services? How do they relate to pavement preservation? Does it impact our lane mile goals for the fiscal year? Is it just a normal part of this process that I just, didn't know that much about? So,
Yeah, Victoria V. Augustine with the Bureau of Street Services. Regarding the 1.13 million contractual services for road infrastructure survey, we're planning to contract out the data collection of our survey of our streets, and we're still doing the analysis in-house in the street services. Currently, we have a survey van that we're using to collect the data, and it's really old and outdated. And so instead of purchasing a new van, we recommend that we just contract out the data collection services so that it would be more accurate and more efficient, and they can do it faster for us.
And this is the survey to see, the grade A through F on the streets?
Yes, to measure the PCI of the street segments.
Okay. So does transferring this have any impact on our lane miles goals or any of that? Or this is just, we have to do it anyway?
No, it's more of like being able to put together a program for the next 5 years.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Martinez, Street
Not for
Services?
street services, no.
Mr. Englander? In recommendation 34, one of the MICLA recommendations, there's a request for reapproval of $1.9 million almost for tree trimming vehicles and equipment. Do we have crews budgeted that can accommodate that equipment already?
Yes.
That's already in the current year budget or proposed for next year's budget?
Yes, it's in the current year budget.
Okay. So without this equipment, those crews are being underutilized?
Yes.
Okay. That's all I need to hear. Okay, anything else for street services? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings up, let's go ahead to DOT next. Sorry, I didn't, was this one of yours too?
Several of us had
Okay.
what I had.
Fire away, Mr. Blumenfield.
Okay. So there's a decrease in $239 million within the Prop A Local Transit Assistance Fund, and the report says there's no programmatic impact as anticipated. But I know DOT has proposed significant increases in dash services, including something I'm very focused on, which is the Canoga Park Dash in my district. So where are the funds for the dash expansion going to come from? Is there any risk to them? I just want to make sure we're working on issues with the Orange Line, and I just want to sort of have eyes wide open, make sure that there's not going to be any negative impact to that process as we move forward. That I'm not seeing here.
Right.
I just kind of want a reassurance.
Good afternoon, Monique Earl, Assistant General Manager, LADOT. This action that you see in the FSR is an administrative cleanup of previous year appropriations. It in no way impacts our proposed current year allocations. It does not impact the DASH expansion or any of the other projects that are currently pending. We have plenty of funding available. This, however, again, is just administrative cleanup that had not taken place.
Thank you. I'll sleep better tonight.
Yeah.
Ms. Martinez.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the Taxicab franchise. So now that the CPUC has now taken control over the the franchise, and given that we're also going to be entering in the process of renewing the Taxicab franchise for the city of LA, and then also given the fact that we've increased services with the ride shares companies, what impact do you see a continued decline in these types of revenues? Because we saw it, we took a 36% hit. Moving forward, how much do you think we're going to decrease our revenues by?
Angela Baruman, LADOT. Unfortunately, I don't have that information here for you today, but we are keeping an eye on it and expecting a slight decrease. But I'm sorry, unfortunately, I don't have those numbers.
Can you get that to me?
Of
Yes,
course.
we will.
Great. I think we need to be looking at that. Given all the changes with the state and ride share services increase, we're definitely going to take another hit on this.
Yeah, we have a brand-new taxicab administrator, Jarvis Murray. He's closely monitoring this, and we'll have him report back.
So is this right? My notes have that the 36% hit that we did take made up almost $1 million worth of revenues to the city. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, if you can get those numbers to me, I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you. Anything else for DOT? All right, thank you very much. Let's bring up sanitation next.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And as like our previous presenter had mentioned, there was a request for additional funds to continue some of our clean streets efforts, particularly I believe it's the HOPE teams that we've expanded throughout the city of LA. I know it started in my district last year, right before the summer began, but I know we're having to do more of having to respond to some of these larger homeless encampments. And as people are demanding us to get out there and clean up some of this stuff up, I think you need to present your case in terms of why you need additional funds and how we're going to solve this issue moving forward. Go ahead.
Thank you, Councilwoman Martinez. A request, Enrique Zaldivar, our General Manager of LA Sanitation. A request is a global request, meaning all of the livability programs, which include the Clean Streets program, includes the HOPE teams, the OHS Venice, the OHS Skid Row, and the Street Receptacle Program. $2.2 million to be able to finish the year as at the same level of service. We have had a run-up in overtime, which has been one of the main contributors to the deficit. In particular, in the Clean Streets deployment, we were approved a fourth service team or strike team in this fiscal year, which came with 6 months of funding. We were able to get the team up and running very quickly, earlier than 6 months, and so that created an additional drawdown on the salaries. You know, I think for these kinds of teams, it's important, much as I'm borrowing a term from the business sector, time to market. For us, time to deployment was very important, so we got it up and running very quickly this year. So that's contributing to the projected deficit. I will say that we're not in a deficit yet. We have a projected deficit, as was noted in the report by the chair, that we project by the first week in April we would enter into deficit spending. And on the positive side, I know you recognize the incredible gains and the momentum we have built with the deployment of all the livability efforts, including the HOPE teams that deployed this year, as you noted, Councilmember Martinez, with the most recent deployment being in late February of the fourth HOPE team. And so more and more, we're integrating and coordinating the efforts of all of the livability programs. And so we ask that you recognize that the gains have been of great benefit. That doesn't excuse the fact that, you know, we have run into a projected deficit. I recognize that. These are all efforts that were made as a way of getting a handle on the gains that were important to achieve. For a while, we were having endless response times on being able to get to constituent requests. Now we have a handle where we are able to respond to the illegal dumping type of request within 21 days, or 21 days which is still not satisfactory to most offices, if not all of the offices and the constituents. So, but we made incredible gains, and we want to continue the momentum. So we're asking for a $2.2 million request. Some of the things that I, as a general manager, I'm looking, depending on what your disposition is of this, is I do not want to go into deficit spending, obviously, because I don't have the authorization or the authority from you. So we would contemplate ceasing all operations starting this week. We're no longer working overtime. That's already been put into effect. We have a total of 94 positions assigned to these livability programs, of which 78 are already permanent staff assigned. We have a complement of as-needed exempt employees, about 35 to 40 of them. So the first measure, we've already put that into effect this week. We're not working any overtime on any of the programs.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask the CAO's office to help us figure out how we're going to help in this effort. So is Mr. Rich Llewellyn still here? I think he might have left.
He's here.
Oh, he's here. I think we've made a lot of commitments in terms of how to deal with our homeless crisis. But nevertheless, I think there's missing parts. This is one of them that continues to be an issue for those of us who have some of the largest homeless encampments in the city. So we need to figure out how we're going to be able to rectify this, because a lot of commitments were made and you see the results. If we overextend ourselves, we end up in a deficit. And we have to respond to some of these quality of life issues, particularly in some of the neediest parts of the city. So I'd like for the CEO's office to help us figure out how we're going to come up with the rest of the money.
Sure. If the direction of this committee is for us to identify the funding sources to cover that gap, really at this point there are only two options, and both will impact the reserve fund at the end of the year. The first option is before touching the reserve fund, as we indicated in this report, we left about $2.2 million, which is coincidentally about the amount that the department is requesting, in the unappropriated balances shortfall account. And so we were holding off on transferring that 2.2 until the year end, and that was contributing to the solutions that we would be proposing in the year end that reduce, at this point, the deficit to below $10 million. So if we tap into that $2.2 million now for this service, that in essence increases our deficit to solve at the year end to over $11 million. And that is, mind you, with having the Department of the Police Department make those changes to their, and add those controls on their spending, as was indicated when they were up here. Ultimately, what this means is that whatever deficit is unresolved will likely result in a further transfer from the reserve fund that will, further reduce the reserve fund for where it stands right now, under 5%. And that's not including any potential revenue shortfalls that we may have to deal with that would also potentially reduce the reserve fund any further. So, but if it is a direction of this council, then that's the recommendation we would make, is to take it from the UB, the $2.2 million in there.
My biggest fear is that if we stop now, the amount of cleanup of having to catch up is going to exacerbate our efforts, and so I think it's short-sighted. We need to figure out how to continue the work that we're doing, because I can see the progress, I can see the relationships that the teams are building with some of our homeless folks, and so I would hate for us to just stop and then having to, we're building on something here. If we stop now and having to play catch-up when we figure out the money issue, you've seen some of these areas. The Basin, for example, had over 100 people. Cabrillo Way had over 300 people.
Yes.
There's massive cleanups efforts, and I just hate for us to stop and then play catch-up 6 months from now when the issue is going to be 3 times worse.
And I'm not making any arguments against that reasoning.
It's, at the end of the day, it's this body who makes commitments, who stands up and say we want to fix things, we want to help people, but when it comes to paying for it, we always have that same issue.
Sure.
So I agree with the importance of the service and the need to continue it, and the problems that are caused by discontinuing these services. On the other hand, one of the commitments that were made, since we're talking about commitments, is our budget. Our budget is a commitment as well. And we're not yet to the end of the year, and we had planned to spend a certain amount of money on these services. We're not going to get to the end of the year. And I appreciate, Mr. Saldivar, you've gone above and beyond the call to try to, address the concerns that council members have and to try to be responsive, and I appreciate that. But there's no way around the fact that if we pursue the course that Mr. Ceja just laid out, we are making a budgetary decision to transfer services from other needs in our budget to the Department of Sanitation. And I don't think it's appropriate to be put in the position of having that be a fait accompli, honestly. We have a budget that we set in the middle of at the beginning of the year. We modify it in the FSRs based on changed circumstances. I don't see a changed circumstance here other than we spent all the money. So I would not be supportive of a change to that effect now if we can perhaps have a report back by the time of the next FSR that encompasses a proposal that we could vote on. We should consider that in the context of the larger demands that all of our other departments have as well.
I would like to also ask, can some of these pieces be sent to E&E to continue the dialogue with sanitation? In terms of what your needs are, the amount of overtime you've had to, there's so many
Pieces to it, yes.
to this issue that I would like for us to discuss in my committee, so I would like to do that as well.
I think that makes sense. The synergies even of some of the programs.
I just don't, not all districts are created equal.
That too.
And unfortunately, my district ends up bearing the burden for a lot of these ongoing issues that we never seem to have a solution for, or the money to pay for it. So I would like for this, can we send this to my committee and we can continue the dialogue?
Sure. So obviously, the budgetary aspect of it never leaves this committee, but on the policy
I would like
discussion,
to
we can certainly
discuss
do that.
the
Sure.
overtime and the amount of teams that you have, what you've rolled
Absolutely.
out so far.
I think that would be useful, yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Mr. Bloomfield, do you have anything?
Just to look at any possibilities of special funds being used in some way, creatively to be able to make up for this, because that would be the ideal solution, is if we can find a non-general fund way to balance this out, to get the service that we know we need without impacting the general fund. And I'm assuming you've looked at that already.
Yes, I mean, we always have that as one of our caveats on being able to leverage our own resources for the good of the overall services that we provide. And so we do that not only on our own, but working with the CAO and the CLA to figure out ways to stretch our own special funds. And we will continue to do that, Councilmember, to every extent possible.
Great. Well, this seems like ideal opportunity to get creative.
Committee members, if I may, so we just want to remind the committee that our trigger date here is April 1st. So any conversations that are happening between now and then, I guess, it should be time sensitive. So there should be some kind of direction that April 1st, these services are impacted.
So I'm very well aware of the April 1st deadline.
And then the other, the next financial status report is expected to be the year end.
Right.
Our last FSR.
I got it.
Okay. Anything else for sanitation members? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, that will bring up next personnel. Okay. Good afternoon. Who called personnel?
I think that was me.
Mr. Blumenfield.
Yeah, the reason I wanted to mention is the workers' comp piece just jumped out at me. It's a projected $14.5 million deficit, which is about 10% of the budgeted amount. And I know we've talked about this before, but it just jumped out as a big number. I wanted to find out what was going on and if there's something more that we should be doing. Obviously, there's the bigger issue, but it's kind of a bright light.
Yes, there's two drivers to this deficit. The first is our medical spend is trending above what was actuarially projected. The other driver is related to the actual permanent disability benefits that are paid to the injured worker. Those were statutorily increased under the last reforms. So those are the two major drivers of this deficit right now.
Statutorily increased by the city or the state?
The state.
The state.
Yes.
And when did that happen? Wasn't that?
That was under SB 893, and that was in 15-16.
Yeah,
But we're just starting to see that benefit increase as we settle the claims now.
Okay. And that's, I mean, but that's hitting us with a 10%, I mean,
Between those two, yes.
okay. And what's the plan of action?
We do all the best practices in cost control under medical expenses right now, and then statutorily, we just have to pay that increase in the benefits to the injured workers. This information is being provided to our actuary. We should actually have the actuarial projection for the upcoming budget later this week.
Okay, that's serious numbers. And in terms of the healthcare increase, does that have anything to do with the fear of losing coverage under the new Trump lack of healthcare plan?
I don't believe that we can tie it to that. I mean, as part of the reforms also, there was an adjustment to the state fee schedule, which dictates what you pay for these medical services. So that was kind of a mixed bag, is some of the fees rose and some of the fees were decreased. But that's what's driving it on the medical side.
And in terms of what we're looking at, the mayor recently released an executive directive to create, among other things, a risk cabinet and to work with departments to look at their workers' compensation expenditures, at safety measures, to have those conversations with the departments to try and look at things that we as a city can do to have a positive impact on those numbers.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, anything else for personnel? By the way, this is an area of great concern of the Risk Management Task Force as well, to look in ways that we can reduce some of the workers' comp costs, to be sure. Okay, thank you very much. And before we go to the next department, I should have done this at the outset. I should have told the members of the public what's going on here, because you've been waiting very patiently. You happen to be here at the meeting that we do one of our financial services financial status reports, which we do 4 times a year only. It's a comprehensive review of the city's whole budget, where we make modifications in the budget. That's why we're hearing from all these departments. So thank you for your patience. I apologize, this is a long agenda item, but it's the ordinary course of business of this committee. We do this 4 times a year, so sorry. And thank you. Okay, so that brings us next to EWDD.
No, I think it was all.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. Mr. Bloomfield.
So, unfortunately, federal grants are diminishing, and it only looks worse as we're moving forward. But the real reason I want to ask is the FSR recommends a reduction in contractual services that might postpone anticipated real estate studies and reports. And as you know, I'm very focused on certain projects, particularly the former CRA stuff in Reseda, and I want you to assuage my fears about the contractual services, the impact on acquisition and sale, that this reduction, what the impact will be on these types of projects. And obviously, I'm asking because I'm worried about the very tight timelines that we have for the Reseda project.
Yeah, because our options are set to expire, and so we're very cognizant of the timeframes. I'm sorry, my name's Jan Perry. I'm the General Manager, Economic and Workforce Development Department. To my right is Michael Chi, who is the head of our budget team. To my far left is Anthony Sanchez, who's also a member of our budget team. And if we get into specifics, they are here to back me up. But on your general question, and I'm familiar with the project of which you speak and understand, and we're very, very much aware of the time frame that the option is set to expire. The contractual services list, which was pre-bid and pre-procured, was intended to speed things up, so that we didn't have to go out and procure someone who had, capacity in appraisal or in escrow or title searches, things like that. Obviously, if we reduce it, we'll have to make some adjustments. But I expect that because we're under that balancing act of set to expire on those options, we're going to make it work however we have to make it work.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. I think that's it. Anything else for you, WDD? Thank you, Ms. Perry. I think that's it.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, members, anything else? Anything else for the CAO? Any other items to be discussed? Okay, we do have some public comment cards on item number 7. So I'd like to call first Doretta Sandoz and Robert Harris.
And Mr. Chair,
Yes.
For the record, we also have a technical amendment by CLA
Yes,
as well.
thank you. We will get to that as well.
Good afternoon. Thank you
Good
for having us. My name is Doretta Sandoz. I'm the Vice President of the Los Angeles Police Protective League. I have 23 years on the department and 15 years as a sergeant. A city's budget is a reflection of its priorities. As you make decisions today, and as we prepare for next year's budget, there are some facts that you must consider. Violent crime is up 69% since 2013. And that's a fact. That came straight from the department's source. Over the last 2 years, we've seen a 13% increase in murder victims, a 48% increase in aggravated assault victims, a 22% increase in shooting victims, and over 14,000 additional property crimes. Those are the facts. In 2016, 7 of our geographical 21 police divisions had response times that either exceeded or were dangerously low, exceeding our 7-minute response time goal for 2000 for Code 3 911 calls. Our city's response time, is that we have a minute?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
I was like, what's that noise?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Mr. Harris.
Good afternoon. My name's Robert Harris. I'm a director with the Los Angeles Police Department, and I have 17 years with the department. I want to address a few specific budget recommendations in this report. Simply put, an across-the-board civilian hiring freeze makes no sense. Hiring civilians allows more officers to go into the field, and that was supposed to be a budgetary priority in this year's budget. It takes about a year to fill a civilian position and get them trained to the point where we can free up 1 police officer. Already, the department has been unable to hire enough civilians to keep up with attrition, and to date, we've only been able to hire and train enough civilians to free up 17 police officers. When it comes to promotion freezes, while it makes sense to save money, it has a cost. We currently have 200 vacancies in our detective ranks, hampering our ability to investigate and solve crimes, and we're also concerned with any direction that would restrict the department's ability to use overtime funds to backfill vacancies on patrol. We cannot protect our neighborhoods with any fewer police patrols than we do now. We're asking for your leadership in taking the city's rising crime rate as a top priority. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Spindler and Mr. Herman, please. 1 minute on item 7.
So as I pointed out before the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment, right in this room, you gave us a report. The city has $6.7 billion in cash sitting around. Isn't that right? Right in this room. So if you're $243 million in the hole, cut a check from those funds, which are not making any interest, and transfer it to the general fund, and you cover your budget deficit. You have a rainy day fund. We've had a lot of rain. So the rainy day fund can be covered with the $6.7 billion you got sitting in the bank. Now, what's the reason why you're not doing this? Because you're scamming us. You got plenty of money. So you're a little short. You got plenty of money. So just go to that slush fund, that $6.7 billion, and cut that check to the general fund, and all these fine people don't have to go and have a bunch of layoffs. Stop the fraud and be transparent.
Thank you. Mr. Herman.
Definitely. Transparency of problems, right? You have all these bureaucratic dollars going where? Down the gutter. What a waste. $224 million deficit to account for, in addition to this budget. what the hell are you doing, goat man? You got to come with a plan, because with the deficit, with the ceiling coming down on you, definitely as Spindler brought out, we're going to have a shower. A broken promise by a run-down, ignorant mayor, Eric Garcetti, at the marathon. He says everything is so well in L.A., but I want the street service people to fix my goddamn potholes. I'm tired of driving over potholes. I'm tired of poor infrastructure in this city. And when those cases come back from the slip and falls, I hope they put Woods versus Los Angeles right up your ass and sue you for every fucking dollar for slip and fall incidents in Los Angeles. So I waved back my 1 second.
So my apologies to the members of the public. This is what we deal with, unfortunately, every meeting. So, okay, on item number 7, we have some technical amendments. And any other recommendations from members before we go to the vote on item 7?
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
pardon me. There were 3 reports requested from yourself, Councilmember Martinez, regarding LAFD reporting back on the final phase of CAD by year-end FSR by fire department. LADOT to report back on reductions in Taxicab Franchise revenues by Councilmember Martinez, and a request, I believe, by yourself and Councilmember Martinez regarding Sanitation to report back on the Clean Sweep program and overtime, the amount of teams, and also request to refer that to E&E committee. Did you want those as part of the recommendations in the committee report?
Does that capture it, members? Okay.
Well, and one addition to that, we talked about looking for special funds as part of the sanitation, as part of the report back to also look at the special fund possibility.
Okay. Then without objection, those additions will be included within our action today. And then the amendment is before you as well, the technical amendment. Mr. Englander, did you have something else?
Not on the technical amendment,
Okay.
on something else.
Go right ahead.
Okay, just wanted to also acknowledge on the record that the Controller's March 1st report for fiscal year 16-17 revenue shortfalls of 0.5%. So if the amount was accepted and used to revise the adopted budget for the current year, then it would subsequently reduce the dollar amount necessary to maintain a 5% reserve. So just wanted to put that out.
Thank you. All right. If there's no other recommendations for action, if there's no objection, it will be the action of the committee. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
Did you want me to read those CLA recommendations into the record?
Oh, yes, I guess you should.
The Chief Legislative Analyst is recommending the following mid-year FSR amendment to align with current expenditure patterns, transfer $700,000 from Council Fund 128, account 1010 salaries general as follows, $300,000 to account 2120 printing and binding, and $400,000 to account 6010 office and administrative expenses. Additionally, transfer $2,323.56 from the UB line item, offsite council and committee, account 580160 to ITA Fund 132, account 1090, salaries overtime for various offsite evening meetings, including the Health Commission.
Okay, very good. So without objection, with those amendments, it will be the action of the committee to approve the FSR as amended.
Well, yeah, with that, though, I just want to make sure that the recommendation to ask the CALA and the CAO to work together and come back with a suggestion on how to identify the $1.1 million that I spoke to when we first opened
yes,
up.
Yes.
I just want to make sure that's captured as part of the approval.
And that was, in fact, the first request, so you're absolutely right. Did you catch that, Mr. Williams?
And I can
You got
give you the
that?
language
Okay.
specifically.
Okay, there's no objection?
No.
Okay, it will be so amended. All right, thank you all very much. Okay, so, folks, we would typically go into closed session now, but you've been waiting here for a while, so I'm going to go ahead and move out of order to take general public comment. So I'd like to, and the way we do this is it's 1 minute per speaker, and I'd love to be able to be flexible on it, but unfortunately with this many folks, I just can't, because we still have a bunch of people waiting in the other room to hear from us. So I apologize in advance for that. But our first speaker is Sam Orndorff, followed by Tamara Case, followed by Douglas McBride.
If your name is called, fill up all 4 seats up at the front, please.
So that was Sam Orndorff.
Yeah, that's me.
Tamara Case.
That's me.
And Douglas McBride. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for hearing me, and thank you for all the work you do. I'll just try to keep it short and simple. Pretty much everyone here is trying to make an effort to get the City Council to divest from Wells Fargo because it's just not a wise investment. They've already done illegal practices and really fraudulent practices, and I think it's also sort of a backwards way of thinking, not 21st century thinking to invest in Wells Fargo when they're going forward with the Dakota Access Pipeline, which has been roundly rejected by the people who will be affected by that. So I just hope that the City Council would consider divesting all ties and not investing in Wells Fargo any longer.
Okay. Thank you. Our next speaker is Tamara Case, followed by Douglas McBride, followed by Michelle Milner.
Good day to the council. Thank you for having us here. We appreciate your time and your efforts. We're here to stand. I'm standing as an individual and a citizen and a member of humanity and Mother Earth. And we're asking the City of Los Angeles to consider divesting in Wells Fargo Bank for their illegal practices and for moving through indigenous land and breaking treaties. These are important issues to Native American traditions and cultures and people, as well as humanity in general, and for millions of people's water source. We're asking you to consider this in moving your funds to more clean energy, out of fossil fuel industry, in a clean energy solution such as solar power and wind power and hydropower and sustainable practices. We're asking you to invest your money into businesses that will support the earth and humanity and that are beneficial for our health and for our children as well as the planet. So we please ask you, and we pray for you and your families. And this is not just for indigenous people, this is for all people.
Thank you very much.
Thank you and good day.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Douglas McBride, followed by Michelle Milner and Tayana Vizcarra, and I ask that you go ahead and come on up to the table, please. Yes, sir.
Hi, good afternoon to you on the committee. I'll try to keep it brief as well. I'm here as a part of a group to support Divest LA. I'm just a general citizen. I don't work for Divest LA. I am a father of 2 little girls. I grew up in LA. And I want LA to make some good choices. You guys, many of you have family, little ones yourselves, and I imagine that when you're at a family gathering, the kids and all the folks in your family look to you, they point, they say, hey, he works for the city, he's a big guy. She does a lot of stuff with the city, And for you guys to be able to live up to the hope that those kids have in their eyes, you've got to make some good choices, and I hope you can do that by listening to the other comments of the folks here on behalf of Divest LA. They'll make some good comments, I hope, and I'll hand it over. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Michelle Milner, followed by Tayana Vizcarra, followed by Marco Zermeño.
Folks, when your name's called, go up to the chairs, please.
Is Michelle Milner here? She left? Okay, thank you. All right, Ms. Vizcarra, followed by Marco Zermeño.
Hi, my name is Tayana Vizcarra. I'm a resident of Los Angeles and just returned from Standing Rock and participated there in the ongoing fight against the Dakota Access Pipeline. We want things to change and we want things to be different. And we feel that the most important way that we can do that now is to divest from Wells Fargo. And we're asking you that you consider that you be on the right side of history, because although in your decision-making process, we know that it's going to cost you something. As we learned when we did the divestment in Santa Monica, we knew that they had lost $120,000 in that shift. But in the process of any kind of shift that requires ethical and justice and is served not just for seeking profit, but for the people. So we ask that you do this.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Marco Zermeño, followed by Mylene Carberry, followed by, followed by Noreen Nayar. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon, council members. My name is Marco Zermeño. I'm of the American Indian Movement of Southern California. I'm calling this committee to put on this next agenda to divest from Wells Fargo. I say this because this council passed a resolution last year to stand with the Standing Rock Sioux tribe against the Dakotas Access Pipeline. Divestment puts a strong action behind those words. Seattle, Santa Monica, San Francisco, and Davis have all voted to divest. They follow their hearts and the urging of indigenous peoples and our allies to do this. As relatives, as human beings, we owe it to our children to fund these dirty energy projects. Miniwachoni is not water is life. It's more than a hashtag. It's a statement of our resolve to save our Mother Earth. To put it this way, when a gallon of water becomes 3 times, 4 times, 5 times more than a gallon of water, we could look back at today and say we did something, we pulled the plug, we wash our hands of these dirty energy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Our next speaker is Mylene Carberry, followed by Noreen Nayar, followed by George Funmaker. Good afternoon.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm glad for the opportunity to be able to voice. I think my absolute disgust with Wells Fargo and their predatory practices. They not only, to Standing Rock, stand out as just obscene in their investment with Energy Transfer Partners and how they treated the water protectors, but also the predatory practices around foreclosures and targeting people of color and vulnerable people. And then their most recent horrifying thing of making fake accounts on customers' backs and the millions of dollars that it charged. Vulnerable citizens. You know, this is our money and we want to invest it in responsible banking practices, not predatory practices. And that's why I'm here today saying divest. Divest from Wells Fargo, invest in responsible banking institutions. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, you're Ms. Carberry?
Yes.
Okay, great. So our next speaker is Noreen Nayar, followed by George Funmaker, followed by Irene Montantes. Any of you here? Come on up if I called your name. Good afternoon.
Mitaki ape, chante washten ape, chauz ape, dama kota hemacha, miwa kao yate tohamahi. I greet you in my Dakota language. My name is George Funmaker. I'm a citizen of the Ocheti Shakoni, and I urge you today to divest from Wells Fargo and stop supporting indigenous genocide. We're here as water protectors. All my relatives here, these are all water protectors, and we're protecting the water, we're protecting the land for our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. So I ask the city of LA to stop supporting indigenous genocide. You have blood on your hands from many years of colonization, so we ask you to reconcile and wipe the blood from your hands and divest from Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo and many other banks are funding indigenous genocide, is killing the land, is killing the water, and we need to stop it. We need to stop it for our children, for our grandchildren. We want them to have clean water. We want them to have fresh air to breathe. So I ask that you help us in divesting from Wells Fargo. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Noreen Nayar, followed by Irene Montantes, followed by Shannon Rivers. Is Noreen here? No? Okay. Irene?
Yes.
Did I pronounce your name right? I'm sorry.
Yes, it's Irene Montantes.
Montantes,
Yes.
okay.
I'm a mother of 2 boys.
I'm here on behalf of them, on behalf of all children and future generations. I'm asking that we cut ties to Wells Fargo and join the other cities, Santa Monica, San Francisco, Albuquerque, New Mexico, North Carolina, and Seattle, in pulling billions from the banks that support the Dakota Access Pipeline. We need to end the environmental destruction that institutions like Wells Fargo partake in to protect future generations. Earth's population will be forced to colonize 2 planets within 50 years if natural resources continue to be exploited at the current rate, according to a report study by the World Wildlife Fund. World Wildlife Fund warns that human race is plundering the planet at a pace that outstrips its capacity to support life. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Shannon Rivers, followed by Dr. Leah Garland, followed by Hugh Kenny.
Good afternoon, members of the council. I'm a former delegate to the United Nations and permanent forum member on indigenous issues. Today, there are 175,000 Native people living in Los Angeles and Los Angeles County area. They did not move here by their choice. They moved here because of ongoing relocation and genocide of their territories, their resources, their natural resources. Their livelihoods have been moved and been violated against individuals, companies, and banks like Wells Fargo. The city of Los Angeles has the opportunity, the chance, to do something drastically different than everyone else. If we truly want to change the way we live, the way we act, what we eat, how we pollute our air, then we have to divest from these companies, these organizations, these multinational extractive industries that continue to violate our earth, our systems, and our society. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I'm sorry, sir, tell me your name again, sir?
Shannon Rivers.
Thank you. Okay, our next speaker is Dr. Leah Garland, followed by Hugh Kenny, followed by Fixico Crathan.
Hi, I'm Leah Garland, and I am part of the steering committee of Fossil Free California. By divesting from Wells Fargo, the city of LA will be taking a stand against predatory lending and against the violent actions of the Dakota Access Pipeline. In December of 2016, the LA City Council agreed that LA needs to move toward 100% renewables soon. The DWP's response was a 50 by 65% renewables by 2050 plan, which, as you know, is not going to cut it. We need to push the DWP to create a plan toward 100% renewables as soon as possible. We start that forward momentum toward a fossil-free LA here by taking a stand to work only with financial institutions whose banking practices match ethical decisions that will create a livable planet for our future, because climate change is always a social justice issue. And here in LA, we have some of the worst pollution in the nation. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Hugh Kenny, followed by Fixico. Go right ahead, sir.
Yeah, hi, my name's Hugh Kenny. I'm a retired union carpenter from LA here. When I got retired, I started looking around, and I looked around, and I noticed that the planet was dying, and I had the time to study and take a look around, and all of us kind of know it or intuit it or don't want to look at it. I had time to look at it. All of us have been complicit in that situation. All of us have an opportunity now with this group of people that I support, who are led by indigenous people who know how to survive in bad times, who know this planet. Pay attention to them, and they're sharp politically. They know what they're doing too. They're organized. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Hello. My name is Fixico. I am from the Shawnee and Muskogee Creek Nations of Oklahoma. I was at Standing Rock for many months. One of the things that the Dakota Access Pipeline backed was the police brutality. I was there for one of the events on November 20th. There was an elder that I held in my arms. He died because he was hit with a concussion grenade at the heart. He had to be resuscitated back to life twice. This is what they were backing. My sister, she lost one of her eyes. This is what they were backing. Help us. Help us to bring back the colors of our Mother Earth and nature by simply divesting from Wells Fargo, because Wells Fargo also backed what the police, the sheriffs, Dakota Access was doing. Help us by divesting. Please, we ask you that respectfully and humbly. Please.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Arash Yusuf, followed by Courage, followed by Maya Rose Burko. Sorry if I'm mangling the names, but go right ahead.
I'm just here in solidarity of the indigenous folks of this land. Know that we're in Tongva territory. We're the city of Los Angeles, but it's actually Tongva territory. And we have to acknowledge that this land has been taken away from them. Their world has been taken away from them, and we need to do whatever we can to be in solidarity and to divest from organizations and businesses and banks that continue this genocide that we've started 500 years ago. That's it for me.
Thank you.
My name is Courage. I'm here supporting Divest LA. This is the bank that LA does business with. They bankrolled $1.2 billion in the private prison industry, defrauded $2 million in subprime mortgages, opened $2 million unauthorized accounts, stole money from average everyday people. They're a leader in predatory loans and aggressive mortgages. They funded a $185 million decision to probe discriminately. And they're also a leader, of course, of funding DAPL. I was at Standing Rock for many months, and I saw the brutalization of children. They poisoned us with crop dusters, tear gas, people trapped halfway submerged in a freezing river. 160 were treated with hypothermia. We were arrested en masse and held in dog kennels. They tore and dug into our ancestral burial grounds and unleashed attack dogs on unarmed victims and families. This is the bank that you are doing business with currently. The environmentalist scientists all agree this could poison the water of 18 million people. And we need to back them and back the Water is Life movement. And I strongly urge you to consider all of this I just said. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Maya Rose Burko, followed by Cynthia Curio. Is Maya here?
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Cynthia.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm here to share a concern of mine. I'm very afraid what I will tell my 8-year-old daughter when in 30 years her generation inherits all the problems that we've caused, either by deciding these type of projects that actually harm our earth, and also by doing nothing, those that are in positions of power, such as yourselves. So I would like you to think about that, because it's going to affect your children, your grandchildren, and this is something money cannot fix. This is something that we could invest money in now. Renewable energy, something that's sustainable, something that will keep us alive. This is not idealism. It's a reality that we're going to have to deal with. So I'm just here to say, please, divest from Wells Fargo.
All right. Thank you very much. And is Maya here? Maya Rose Burko, she left? Okay. All right. Thank you all very much for coming down. I appreciate your time. Thanks for sharing your views, and thank you for your patience. I'd next like to call up for general public comment and for all of the agenda items that they submitted cards on, Mr. Herman, followed by Mr. Spindler.
So you hear the outcry of the public. The public disagrees with the pipeline. They disagree with the changes in our natural environment. More natural environment disasters like we had in Biggers, Englander's district. The gas leak. How many goddamn more to ruin our lives with cancer and other diseases and destroy our water? You're fucking up our country. You're fucking up our cities. Quit it. Now under Woods versus Los Angeles, our 2 items on slip and fall, I really and hopefully those attorneys stick the paybook to your ass so you can pay up. We've asked you to fix our sidewalk and streets and make them ADA compliant, and you still default. You still come up with excuses, $224 million and a $1.5 billion lawsuit under Woods versus Los Angeles. I was up in Sacramento, Barden versus Sacramento, and guess what? We got all new curbs, we got all new sidewalks, we got all new fucking shit to walk on. Path to travel. level, pedestrian-friendly streets, and none of this fucking sorry-ass infrastructure you drive all over with potholes in the streets. Fix the shit, Eric Garcetti. I was at the marathon, and I told you as I yelled out, fix the fucking potholes, Eric Garcetti. That's my complaint. And I hope these attorneys under items 4 and 5 and 6, and let's not even forget the incident with the police, brutality against humanity. How much longer? I'm glad to see Lee Baca fall to his knees. I'm glad to see Corona come down. Disgraceful police. No one's above the law, and neither are you, Mr. Puppet Chair.
All right. Thank you for your always enlightening.
Now we get,
Mr. Spindler.
now we get to it. So we have a lot of attorneys sitting in the rooms behind you. All these lawsuits, all this litigation, all this bullshit. Why? You got one councilman, he can't even find his way to a divorce. He gets married to 2 women at the same fucking time, allegedly. You got another woman that just left here, you got a grand jury against her, fucking $25 campaign donations nobody knows about, and you people are in charge of our budget? That's like putting the devil in charge of heaven, man. That's just bullshit. So you're still dealing with Wells Fargo. You get up there all the time downstairs with Herb Wesson. Wells Fargo's a bad company. Wells Fargo abuses its employees. Wells Fargo's predatory practices, and yet you're still doing business with Wells Fargo. Why the fuck are you still doing business with Wells Fargo? You can't find another bank? Wells Fargo's the only bank that you can find? When you take from Canada, rape the land, and then you want to ship that shale shit through a pipeline through a goddamn Indian tribe, through the Dakota Access, the largest water tributary in the United States of America, and you have to build a fucking pipeline, and you do business with this bank so they can rape Native Americans of an Indian burial ground site and potentially contaminate the largest freshwater tributary in the United States? You people are so fucking sick on so many levels. It just astounds me. So go back there, your lawyers are waiting for you to pay them off, because you're going to pay them off to their silence.
I'm trying to listen to Mr. Spindler. You're disrupting the meeting.
He's telling you the truth.
Okay, your
He's
time is
telling you the truth.
Mr. Spindler, disrupting.
That's right, you're a goat.
Quiet, or you're going to have to leave. Okay, can you ask Mr. Spindler to head for the door? And Mr. Herman, out, please. All right, is there any other comment? No, you're being tossed. Is there any other public comment on any of the agenda items?
We still have public comment on item number 9.
Oh, yes, I have one card before me.
I believe you have
Item number 9.
2 cards. There may be 2.
Was there, I have a card from Trinity on item number 9. Is there anybody else who wanted to speak on item number 9 who hasn't already spoken?
It's a general comment and addressing number.
Okay. I'm sorry, we're going to have to wait for Mr. Spindler and Mr. Herman to find their way to the door.
No worries. Hi. As a resident of Los Angeles, I'm urging the council to take the necessary legislative steps to not only divest from Wells Fargo, a bank that the city has had to sue numerous times, a bank that has committed acts of fraud, mortgage fraud, has committed discriminatory acts against communities of color, a bank that has financed the Dakota Access Pipeline. We're not only asking for divestment from Wells Fargo, we're asking the city to strengthen the existing responsible banking ordinance, to install in there some very, very conscious, basic ethical expectations to be able to strengthen not only the social, create social standards, but environmental standards. So we are not, we want the city to invest in conscious and ethical banking institutions that do not have a long history of fraud, and that also do not commit funds to finance destructive environmental acts. My second point was to address the item number 9, which is the city's contract with the Bank of New York Mellon. This is a bank like Wells Fargo that has...
One second. Mr. Williams, she was speaking on general public comment and on item number 9, so if we can give her one more minute, please.
So we're also here to oppose the city's contract with the Bank of New York Mellon. The Bank of New York Mellon, like Wells Fargo, has a long history of mortgage fraud. 2015, Bank of New York Mellon paid a $714 million fraud settlement for overcharging customers. In 2016, they paid $30 million to U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission for fraud. They're also facing a class action lawsuit by investors for causing $1 billion in mortgage loss. So in addition to that, the Bank of New York Mellon is an investor in the Saddle Trail pipeline, and that is currently threatening waterways and destroying ecosystems in the Alabama region down to Central Florida. So it's critical that the city takes the necessary legislative action to protect the interests of the people in this community, to protect the future of our planet, and the well-being of all. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Mr. Williams, any other comment cards on any of the agenda items?
No, sir, that concludes all the public comment.
Okay, so on item number 9, was there anybody else? Okay, come on up, sir. I'm sorry if I misplaced the card. Go right ahead. 1 minute, please.
My name is Rob, and I wanted to talk about something that happened 3 years ago. LA City Council unanimously moved to renegotiate a bad interest rate swap deal with Bank of New York Mellon. That could potentially cost us up to $170 million. One council member claimed we need to hold Wall Street accountable, where others have not, and let Wall Street know we're too big to ignore. Council received a confidential report from the city attorney. At least from what I could find online, I couldn't find access to that. Isn't that something that should be available to the public so we know what your rationale for not making any further moves on that issue was? And is it the case that these institutions are too big for the city to negotiate with? That's all. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. And again, thank you all for your patience. Comment on items 1 through 9 is now closed. General public comment is now closed, and we will proceed next into our closed session items. So thank you all very much for coming down. Appreciate your patience. And since our lawyers came back, I need to ask you to go ahead and exit the room so we can take our closed session. The city attorney wanted to hear items 1, 6, 1...
Items 1, 5, and 6.
1, 5, and 6 first, please. We can do all those together.
Matt Crawford, Director of Financial Reporting for the Controller. You have before you our annual March 1st revenue forecast, our charter-mandated report estimating the revenue for the rest of this year and projecting the revenue for next year. We put the forecast together with a combination of statistical analysis, discussions with local economists and sector experts, and pretty much every department across the city. For this year, as the CAO kind of already walked you through, we're projecting revenue to be slightly down from the budget. Our number in our report is about $28 million, though obviously that's making some couple relatively broad assumptions about revenues that haven't come in yet, specifically business tax. It's a lot. I would say that the negative 28 seems like a negative, and it is, but certainly a lot better off than we were all afraid a few months ago. So that is good news. Looking forward to next year, though, I think the city is really facing a pretty significant revenue challenge. I think you've heard about it in a couple places, but we're projecting essentially zero net growth for next year from this year. I think the number we ended up projecting was a positive 13 million. So essentially flat for revenues. The biggest drivers of this are, first is one-time revenue. This year, 16-17, about 2% of the general fund was funded by one-time revenue from the reserve fund and from the unwinding of the triple flip. That was $100 million in one-time revenue. Now, there's nothing wrong with one-time revenue. There's one-time revenue in every year's budget, but I think this year is going to be a pretty powerful example of kind of what happens when you get used to that one-time revenue and then it doesn't come. So that's 2% down before you even start. And then the balance of the revenues, the rest of it, is coming in, and we're estimating kind of moderate growth, 2.5%. But starting from behind, that doesn't give you much to work with as you go into the budget. The second piece holding it back is departmental receipts. CAO in the FSR identified this year departmental receipts are lagging significantly. We rely on the departments for a tremendous amount of their analysis and expertise to put together the estimates for next year. And their estimates for next year are even lower than their estimates for this year. So that's not particularly good news either. That is an area we can work on. We can, through your body and the CAO, can really push departments to find every dime they can and pull those in, reimburse everything they can, and get that to the general fund. And I'm sure you guys will do that just to balance this year. That'll help, but it's not going to get us out of the woods. Outside of the two negatives, the rest of the funds, as I said, are growing about 2.5%, which reflects kind of a gradual slowing of the economic growth that we've seen over the past maybe 5 years. Property tax does continue to be strong, not amazingly strong, but we're projecting 5% growth in our biggest category. And the other bright light is the hotel tax, transient occupancy, which is projected to grow by about 8%, funded or driven largely by downtown LA with new hotels and expanded hotels and refurbished hotels. The rate capacity is very high, and the rates are continuing to go up. So that really helps us. That's probably one of the most visible things in the city that actually results in money into the general fund. It's hotel tax. Talk a little bit about the revenues that we know of that are not in the report. The first is recreational marijuana, with regulatory framework still completely up in the air at the state level and only in early consideration at the city level. I have no way to tell you how much money that will be, so that's why we left it out. Either way, even assuming all of that shakes out in the timeline that it's expected to, the 17-18 revenue will be minimal to the city just because of timing. Maybe 18-19 will be great from that source, but 17-18, there just aren't enough months to generate a lot of revenue from that source. Second is Measure M, the new transportation funding. We have better estimates on this. However, it'll be special fund revenue. That'll be all in a special fund, just like Measure R is set aside. Some of that will come back, I would imagine, as overhead reimbursements. It'll become general fund revenue. But with the policy decisions on how to spend that not made yet, again, I have no way of estimating it. And finally...
Before you move off of that,
yes.
Does anyone believe, or has anybody suggested that the marginal increase in the sales tax will result in any reduction in sales that would offset some of that increased revenue?
We did not hear that fear from the economists we discussed with. I can see the kind of theoretical academic arguments definitely there, and we may see that in a few places, but that's not something we're worried about on a kind of that we'll see on a citywide level.
All right, good, thanks.
Then the last revenue item that we haven't included is the reimbursements from the LAPD transit policing contract. That should bring in approximately $74 million. That'll be general fund revenue. We didn't include that because we thought it would kind of bias the picture, making it look like we have more money than we do, since that money, as it comes in, will all be reimbursement for new costs that we have to incur in order to get it. While we certainly lean on the conservative side for all these projections, because it's always better to be wrong in that direction rather than the other direction, There are a few downside risks that I just want to point out. The electricity users tax, we're estimating that to grow by approximately 8% after discussing the rates and demand with DWP. But that 8% is assuming that that demand, kind of the trend in demand, reverses the trend we're currently seeing. The trend right now is kind of downward on electricity demand, and this is assuming that demand at least turns flat. So that's a downside risk that we may not see. Second, I know you heard earlier and you saw in the CAO report, parking fines are down again this year for the third straight year. Looking at kind of the elements that go into parking fines, there's no real reason to come up with a lower number for next year. We've projected it flat, but considering the trend, that's definitely a downside risk category. And then maybe the big unknown, maybe not so unknown, the federal government. Y'all have seen kind of what the president has said in his budget proposal. Obviously, if some of those cuts come through at those levels, that'll have a very significant impact to city programs. I would say almost all, if not all, of that revenue comes in as special fund revenue to the city, so the direct impact on the general fund will not be large. However, if we do see significant cuts to those programs, there will definitely be impacts on the general fund, whether that be overhead reimbursements that are reduced in revenue, or just the reality, as we've seen in prior years, that some of those cuts from the federal level are just unsustainable at the city level, and that puts new stresses on the expenditure side of the general fund. And the last downside risk, I think, is kind of a policy risk, and again, it's something the CAO has talked to you guys about in prior reports and in the mid-year. You have a number of proposals out there, either in motions or policies that are currently being considered which have revenue impacts. And certainly, we've basically assumed that none of those things actually happen in terms of how we do our forecasting, since none of those have actually happened yet. But we have assumed that the short-term rental revenue sharing agreements or revenue collection agreements continue in their current state. We've also assumed that the gas pipeline monies don't go anywhere, and we've assumed that the new trash franchise fees, which are slated to start in 17-18, and are projected to generate about $16 million in 17-18, will go to the general fund, not special funds. So all of that, kind of those categories, that's well over $50 million in revenue you're talking about. So they are there is a significant impact should those policies start to get adopted, and CAO has certainly advised the council on how to handle that, and I'm sure everybody will let you know what the projected impacts of those policies are when they come through. And with that, I'm available for questions.
Questions, members? None? All right.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your report. Without objection, then, we'll go ahead and note and file the report. And that brings us then to item number 9. Good afternoon. Thanks for your patience.
Sure.
So, what are securities lending services, first of all?
Okay, so Tom Juarez, Office of Finance. So securities lending allows the city to lend out a portion of the portfolio to other financial institutions and in turn receive a fee for those lent securities. So it generates roughly, currently about, $600,000 on an annual basis or so.
It's actually closer to $500,000 annually, but this year we're already at the $500,000 mark. So we've inched up a little more this fiscal year than we have in the prior fiscal years.
Right.
And we expect that as with interest rates rising and as the market conditions improving, that that income will only grow as the market conditions improve.
Okay. And how about financial custody? What does that mean?
So financial custody allows for a third-party institution, in this case a bank, to hold custody of our securities. So we currently have about 10 billion assets under management, primarily in U.S. Treasury debt obligations and other type of fixed income instruments. And what that institution allows that institution to do is administer the process when we purchase or sell securities to act on our behalf and facilitate those trades for us.
Okay, so there's going to be a very narrow spectrum of institutions that are capable of doing these two services, I gather.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this contract was extended before with Mellon, right?
Correct.
Okay, and the reason for that was that there were issues with regard to the standard terms?
Correct. We are currently under contract through a prior iteration of an RFP. An RFP was released, and as a result of that RFP, Bank of New York Mellon once again prevailed in obtaining the award. We extended it once back in September to allow time to complete our negotiations. There's the business element of the actual transactional activity, but then there are elements in our standard city provisions which sometimes are beyond the business decision-making of the department and the bank, and which we have to then get our respective legal counsels involved as to what is negotiable and what is set in Los Angeles law and not up for negotiation.
Yeah, I guess I didn't realize our standard terms were negotiable. That's what makes them standard terms, I thought. But
there are a few items such as insurance requirements, indemnification, issues such as intellectual property. The standard provisions and I don't want to speak on behalf of the Office of the City Attorney, but they're really, you look at them and they have a construction in mind within the context in which they're created. And we're dealing with financial institutions that, for instance, would say, we own the IP rights to our trademark, whether it's Bank of New York Mellon, whether it's Google or some other financial institution, and the city doesn't own that intellectual property. So sometimes we have to get into crafting the language where the IP rights remain with the bank, but the work product and any associated product that is created by the institution for us, the city owns. And so sometimes that takes a tit-for-tat back and forth between the bank and little massaging on the language with our respective legal teams.
Okay. So is the scope of work in this contract encompassed within the scope of the responsible banking ordinance?
I would have to give that a little bit of thought, and I don't think that's an easy answer for me to give to you right now, Council Member. I don't want to go on a limb and say yes. But this bank is required to submit an RBO disclosure, and it has completed its RBO disclosures. Okay. To the extent that there are any changes to the RBO, this bank would certainly have to comply with those, and we certainly would be required to bring that back if the bank is failing to complete those requirements back to this body.
Okay, very good. Members, anything further on this? No? Okay. Any objections to approval of the recommendation? All right, then, seeing none, that will be the action of the committee. So,
thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your patience. All right. And is there anything else before the committee?
No, sir, that clears the desk.
Very good. Then we are adjourned.